Hi there, my name is James Behringer, and for my Capstone project, I did an Active Directory management system. Little rundown of the program, how it works. The user inputs their information. All that information goes to a SQL table. From there, it updates Active Directory, creating a user. It also creates shares with proper share permissions and NTFS and share permissions. Um, and the whole process is automated. There are two applications that do everything. A C Sharp application and a web app. The C Sharp application, I have pretty good background of working with Visual C Sharp and basic programs with that. Um, and for the web app, I originally it's for non-Windows users on the domain, so they're still able to add members to Active Directory through it. Originally, I was going to do it in HTML, but it needed PHP code, and I am not well versed in PHP, so I decided to go with something else. After a lot of research, I realized I could do pretty much the same thing using ASP.NET with C Sharp backend. So I created an ASP.NET web form. Similar syntax to the C Sharp application, um, but all around it was pretty different. A lot of different namespaces than the C Sharp project. The PowerShell script, it creates the user and the share, um, and it there's a field in there, and I'll explain that a little bit later, that prevents the user from being recreated um, every time the script runs, so that we're not getting errors with it trying to create the same user over and over and over. Uh, I hosted this whole project on two VMs. Um, the domain controller, which is Windows Server 2012 R2, and a client machine, which is on the domain. The domain controller has Active Directory domain services, domain controller services, DNS and DHCP services, the SQL database. It's where the PowerShell script runs, and it has Internet Information Services, which is hosting the web application. This is a little rundown of the Gantt chart. Uh, just the overall progress and how long it took me to do everything. C Sharp and web code design were both on schedule. I completed the C Sharp first just because I was a little bit more familiar with that. And I procrastinated a little bit because on the web app, just because I was a little hesitant to do it with PHP. But once I figured out I could do it with ASP.NET, I was able to complete the project in only a matter of days. Um, Setting up the SQL Management Studio only took about a day. The virtual machine creation took about a day, but most of the time it was a lot of sitting and waiting. And I was able to focus on other aspects while the operating systems were installing. Uh, the domain setup took me a little bit longer than I would have liked, just because I'd never used SQL Server 2012 before, or not SQL Server 2012, Windows Server 2012. I'm more familiar with Windows Server 2008, but and the layout was a little bit different. But once I found everything, I was able to get that done pretty quick, and Google was a big help for that. The client setup took me about 2 days. Adding it to the domain was a little bit tricky because I was having connection issues with Hyper-V, and I solved that by just setting up a private network. Testing the C Sharp code was ongoing throughout the project. Originally, I wish I would have done it strictly on the VM, but I did do it on um, my local workstation at first, and I'll explain a little bit more the issues I had with that on the next slide. Testing the web application, I had less time than I would have anticipated just because I had less time um, to code it. Uh, but that was, again, due to the procrastination. The PowerShell script took me about 5 days, a lot of trial and error. And overall, testing the entire system, making sure everything was working together, took about 3 days. Some of the issues I had, like I said, I on my local workstation, I installed local DB. Um, in hindsight, and this is what I did on the virtual machine. I should have installed SQL Server Express and then installed Management Studios. Um, I had, every time I logged into SQL Server Management Studio on my local machine, I had to go through and put in the instance pipe name every time. It was a very long string, and it changed every time the instance stopped running. For SQL injection prevention, to protect against malicious attacks against the database, for C Sharp, I used key press validation, which you can see right here in the picture. Basically what it does is it only allows certain characters on the keyboard to be used at certain times, and it works pretty well. I tried to do the same thing in the ASP.x file, or ASPX file, using JavaScript code, and even though the code's present, for whatever reason, it's just not working, and I really don't know what I have wrong with that, unfortunately. HTML to SQL, that was another issue I had. Like I said, I didn't like PHP. I had never used it before, wasn't familiar with it. So I made the change to ASP.NET for simplicity's sake. PowerShell, some of the issues I had were protecting against the script trying to recreate a user after it's already been created. So I added a field into the SQL table called user created. It's a tiny int, which means it's either a 1 or a 0, denoting if the user had been created or not. And it uses a where clause to filter out users who have already been created. Some other issues I had were NTFS permissions. For whatever reason, it wasn't showing up for the user unless I was in advanced view. When I went back and I realized that it was still working, I was able to just go back to the old code that I had been using, and it was working just as fine. Learned a lot throughout this project, mainly time management. Looking back, I definitely would have started the web app first, just to get the hard one out of the way and get that said and done with. I learned a lot more with SQL troubleshooting. I already had some experience from my internship, but this really solidified my knowledge in SQL troubleshooting. And PowerShell, I learned a lot with PowerShell. Fortunately, I learned most of what the script does from my a class I took this semester, scripting for system admins, and I probably wouldn't have been able to complete the project without that class, but I learned a lot on top of that, especially writing and reading from SQL using PowerShell. Now I'm going to show you a demo. Right here I have a video of it, but I only did that because when I was presenting in class, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to connect to my local machine. But since we're here on the local machine, I'll go ahead and just do a live demonstration. So right here is the C# application. It's just a basic web form, and we'll go ahead and input some data into there. And like I said, I only allowed certain keys, so you can't put equal signs or letters or any of that stuff into the phone number. It's only certain keys on the keyboard. And it doesn't necessarily need the dashes in there. And we'll just make up an email here. John.doe@example.com. Second address line, we'll say he's in apartment 23, Suburbia, New York, and we'll just make up a zip code. We'll go ahead and hit the update button, which updates it to SQL Server. As you can see, it pops up with a nice little message box that says the user has been created. And the way the PowerShell script works, it works on an hourly basis. It runs using Task Scheduler, so it only runs every hour. Obviously, that can be changed to be more or less depending upon whatever is needed. So we'll hit OK. clear button works, exit button works. Now we'll check out the web page. This is where it's hosted. This is the IP address for the domain controller. And like I said, I tried to put in some SQL protection, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't working. So he's 45 at and we'll put him in New York, New York. We'll just make up some phone numbers here. We'll give him an email. And the username field is protected so that you can't just put any string in there that you want. So there it is. It updated. Everything works pretty well. Hit the clear button, clears out all the text boxes so you can put in another user. Now let's move over to the domain controller. Take a look at that. We have the SQL table here, so we'll go ahead and just take a look. As you can see, those users have been inputted, and the user created field is default set to 0. So let's go ahead and run the script. Like I said, it's in Task Scheduler. It runs every hour indefinitely. So we'll go ahead and run that. Now it should pop up right here with number 2 denoting that 2 users have been added to Active Directory successfully. So there it is. And then it'll create the shares and set proper share permissions for each of them. Let's give that a few more seconds to run. Then it'll close out. Ooh, we have an error. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the log file, see what happened there. These are the last 2, so I'll delete all these old ones. Huh, strange. Well, let's take a look. We can see if they both got created into Active Directory. Yeah, so they're both created here. Take a look at Sam. I think he was the one that had the error. All the stuff is in there. And in the address field here, I have it concatenated. I believe John Doe was the one we gave him an apartment. I have it concatenating in the script so that it just puts it all into one line, both lines 1 and address line 1 and 2. So let's go check out the shares. See what's going on with this. Shares created. Samuel example. And like I said, for whatever reason, it's not showing up right here. I give them modify access in the NTFS permissions, but for whatever reason, it is set in the advanced view. Let's take a look at John Doe. Maybe he was the one with the issue. Huh. Well, I don't know what that error was about, but everything seems to be working pretty well. We can take a look at the SQL table and see that both of the user created fields have been set to 1. And we'll go ahead and log into Sam Example's new profile on the client machine. Ooh. No, we'll just ignore that. Go ahead and sign out. Give it a second. And we'll log in as Samuel. Oops. Example. And the password is just a simple password that I put into a secure string in the script. Obviously, if this were an actual server environment, they would need to change that at their first log on. So we'll wait for him to log in here. For some reason, it always goes through this high screen and sets up the applications for them. I don't know how to bypass this or if there's any way to actually bypass this, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording until that's all set up. Okay, so now we are in, logged in as the user. The map is automatically mapped. So there we go. And he has modify permissions, so he's able to create and delete all that happy stuff. Testing. There we go. If you have any questions about this project, you can email me at jambaron@gmail.com right here. Like that. All right. Thanks a lot for watching.